Hello. So today we are going to be talking about the importance of bilateral coordination. I wanted to start off by defining what even is bilateral coordination, and it is using two sides of your body together for movement. Our brains can be broken down into two hemispheres, the left and the right. And in order to coordinate bilateral movements, the pathways between the left and right sides of the brain must be able to communicate. Some good and common examples of bilateral coordination is walking, jumping, riding a bike, swimming, catching a ball with two hands, washing dishes, cutting in the kitchen, buttoning a shirt, etc. There's a ton of different bilateral coordination movements. These are some of the most common, and I included a few pictures here for people to see, but they're pretty common movements that everybody does every day. Even if you don't realize it, most people are doing bilaterally coordinated movements every single day. They're necessary for completing our occupations and doing the things that we need to do every day. So, on this slide, I wanted to include a visual of brain anatomy, and this is a pretty simple, broken down version of the lobes of the brain and what each are responsible for. So you could kind of tell, depending on where the stroke is in the brain and depending on the area of the lobe or the brainstem or the cerebellum, what things could be impacted, especially in the cerebellum. That impacts our balance, coordination, and fine muscle control. So that's an area of the brain where bilaterally coordinated movements come from. So I just liked this breakdown of what each lobe was responsible for, and you can kind of see, depending on what area of the brain your stroke was in, what things could be impacted, just depending on where the stroke happens. So next, I want to talk about the importance of bilateral coordination, especially after having a stroke. Typically, one side of the brain is more affected than the other in the stroke. And it's important for us to continue to use the affected side in order to promote spontaneous bilateral movements. So, when you've had a stroke and your right side is more affected than the left, it's very important to continue to use that right side of your body. Continuing to use the affected side post stroke helps send signals to your brain that your limbs are still there and still working. Um, it's important for us to continue to use that side to send signals so that your brain can reconnect pathways between the right and left sides of the brain to produce those motor movements. Having a stroke can also reduce blood flow to certain areas of the brain that are required for producing muscle movements. So, continuing to use that affected side will produce the signals our brains need to create those movements. So, this is a continuation of the basic importance of bilateral coordination. Moving increases blood flow to the brain. I feel like we all know that movement is medicine. Movement is the best thing for our bodies to heal. And increasing blood flow to your brain can improve your cognition as well as decrease your chances of developing certain chronic conditions such as dementia. Bilateral movements also send signals to both sides of your brain, which increases brain activity. It's really important that both sides of our brain are being activated and we're creating those pathways so that both sides are communicating. Bilateral movements get both sides of your brain communicating, which, like I just said, is essential, especially when one side has been more affected from the stroke than the other. We want to get both sides of the brain talking, communicating again through the corpus callosum. Um, and overall, those movements bilaterally can help rebuild parts of the brain that were affected by the stroke. So this is another visual I wanted to include that kind of talks about the difference between what the left hemisphere of the brain is responsible for versus the right. So, as we know from this visual and from previous knowledge, a stroke that happens in the left side of the brain impacts the right side of the body, and vice versa. If the stroke happens in the right hemisphere of the brain, the left side of the body is affected. So, on the left side, you have sensory stimulus. On the right side, that's impacted motor control, speech, language, analysis and calculations, time and sequencing, overall cognition and recognition of words and numbers. On the right hemisphere, my picture got cut off a little bit here, but it's all sensory and motor on the left side. It's your creativity, your spatial abilities and perceptions, perception and recognition of familiar faces, places, and objects. So, next, I wanted to kind of talk about the different bilateral activities that you specifically can do, whether or not you're in a wheelchair. So, we can discuss wheelchair mobility. If you're not in a wheelchair, just other things you can do standing. Um, a lot of the seated exercises that we do for morning muscle moves at ASF are bilateral movements. Some examples of these are the arm pulses, drawing shapes with our arms, stirring the pot, bicep curls, wrist extension, flexion, rolling our wrists, flipping the pancake back and forth with our hands clasped. Others are Russian twists, our crossbody sit ups. These are all still while we're seated and great for wheelchair mobility if you're someone who is in a seated position for most of the day. Also, marching. This is not one we do for morning muscle moves, but it's one that we could incorporate for bilateral coordination. Is marching your left leg up and raising your right arm at the same time, and vice versa. So, lifting the right leg and lifting the left arm at the same time. Another thing I wanted to talk about, um, besides wheelchair mobility for these exercises, and I wanted to talk about standing. So we can do for bilateral coordination while standing our lateral sways, anterior and posterior sways with either the right or left leg out in front, shifting weight to the left leg back onto the right or forward onto the right and back to the left. Alternating marches, mini squats, lunge squats, and butt kicks are all just a few examples that we do for morning muscle moves that you might not have even realized were for bilateral coordination. The next point I wanted to bring up here was a protocol called LSVT, which some of you might have heard of. It is a program that was originally designed for people with Parkinson's disease, but has now been broadened and is used for many different populations besides just people with Parkinson's. It's very effective, and the main focus for this protocol is bilateral coordination and focusing on big intentional movements to help increase communication of the brain hemispheres. So, I'm going to include some visuals of this on the next few slides, but it's a great resource. It's a great exercise program just for bilateral coordination. It could be for anyone, super beneficial. And then, of course, I included a few other simple tasks that you can do. Going for walks is probably the easiest, simplest um, bilateral coordination movement or activity you can do. Cutting with scissors, handwriting, practicing buttoning your shirt, playing card games, jumping jacks, playing catch with both hands are all really great examples of activities that you can do. This is one of the slides, one of the visuals I was talking about for LSVT. This is a seated bilateral coordination movement. It kind of walks you through what to do. So you start with your legs out, push your arms out, down, back up, hold for 10 seconds, and you do a big finish, slapping your lap at the end. This is another one of the exercises for LSVT. It has you in a starting position, sitting at the edge of your chair with big posture. You reach across your body with a big reach, big push, maintaining your posture and hold for 10 seconds. This is the third exercise for the LSVT protocol. This one, you're in a starting position with good big posture, a straight back. You step forward with one foot, land big, open your arms and hands big, with a big stomp and a big slap of your hands on your thighs. These are all great for wheelchair mobility and bilateral coordination movements you can do while you're seated in a chair. This is the fourth exercise for LSVT. So you're stepping out sideways, really focusing on having big outstretched arms, your palms facing up, stomping out to the side. Another really great seated position bilateral coordination activity. This is another example of the LSVT activities. This is not a seated one, this is a standing, but this is a good way to incorporate bilateral coordination from sit to stands because a lot of times we stand up from our seats without using our arms to push up. This is a great example of how to lean forward, getting your hips off the chair, using your hands to push from the chair, and opening your arms up big as you stand. This is just a really great example of how to incorporate all of your extremities into sitting and standing. So, the last thing I want to talk about in this presentation is how you can relate bilateral coordination activities into your occupations. So, engaging in bilateral coordination can improve your ability to perform fine motor tasks and gross motor tasks. So, just nailing down those activities impacts so much more than you think in relation to your activities of daily living, which are the things that you need to do, have to do, want to do every day. It can help you button your shirts, get dressed, get up and down from the chairs, get in and out of bed. It helps with your functional transfers, showering, hygiene, and self care tasks. It even affects your ability to be able to hold your toothbrush so you can brush your teeth. For your instrumental activities of daily living, which are things that you don't necessarily have to do, but they contribute to your productivity and the things you need to do every day. Cleaning, meal prep, cooking, pet care, driving, it impacts all of those things. As far as leisure, I included just a few activities, but it can relate to any leisure activity that you could think of. Gardening, yard work, reading, and painting, bilateral coordination impacts all of those things. And then work and school, having bilateral coordination impacts your ability to write, holding your pen or your pencil, cutting with scissors. It impacts all of those things. It's a super vital function to our everyday living. It impacts every single thing that we do, and especially post stroke, it's important to make sure that you're incorporating these activities into your day to day life to get those brain hemispheres communicating and making the connections so that you can do the things that you want to do as independently as possible.